I sat rigidly in the chair, my heart pounding in my ears as the reading of my father's will reached its final moments. I had never cared for wealth. My father had raised me to value integrity over money, love over possessions. But my older brother Ryan had a different perspective. As the lawyer folded the document and cleared his throat, Ryan leaned back in his chair, a smirk already forming on his lips. He was always so sure of himself, always confident that he would get the better end of any deal. And when the lawyer handed me a sealed envelope, I knew something was off. I tore it open with shaky hands. Inside was a check, my father's last gift to me. My throat tightened as I read the amount. It was a substantial sum, but nowhere near what I had expected. Something was wrong. I turned my gaze to Ryan, and that's when I saw it, the gleam of triumph in his eyes. He leaned forward, waving his own check in the air. Looks like Dad finally saw who the real son was. His voice dripped with arrogance. My hands clenched into fists. "What did you do?" Ryan's smirk widened. "Nothing, little brother. I was just always the smarter one." A sick feeling settled in my stomach. This wasn't just about money. It was about years of manipulation, about how Ryan had always managed to twist things in his favor. But this time, it was different. This time, he had stolen from our father's final wishes, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I'll continue with the next section, building on the tension and deepening the emotional stakes. I stared at Ryan, my pulse hammering in my ears. The lawyer was still speaking, but his words had become background noise. My father was gone, and now the one person who had tormented me since childhood was sitting across from me, gloating over what was rightfully mine. Ryan's fingers drummed against the table as he examined his check with satisfaction. "I mean, it's nothing personal, little brother. Dad just knew I'd make better use of it." He flashed me the same smug grin he had worn every time he had cheated, lied, or manipulated his way to victory. My grip tightened around the paper in my hands. "Dad wouldn't have done this. He was fair." My voice came out steadier than I felt. Ryan's smirk didn't waver. Fairness is a perspective. And let's just say, I made sure he saw things from mine. The weight of his words hit me like a gut punch. I had been by Dad's side for years, taking care of him when his health declined. Ryan had barely visited, and now he was sitting here, claiming the bulk of our father's wealth. The lawyer cleared his throat. "All legal documentation is in order. Mr. Carter, if you have any concerns—" "I do," I interrupted. My voice was calm, but my insides burned. "I want to see everything. The will, the statements, any amendments." Ryan scoffed. "Oh, come on, don't be pathetic." He leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "You think you're the first person to get played? You were always the naive one." My hands shook under the table, but I forced my face to remain impassive. I had spent my whole life letting Ryan win, letting him manipulate situations until I was left with scraps. But this time, it was different. This wasn't just about me. This was about our father, his wishes, his legacy. And if Ryan had stolen from him, I was going to find out. I looked at the lawyer. "I'll be requesting a review." Ryan laughed, shaking his head. "Go ahead, waste your time." He stood up, brushing imaginary dust off his expensive suit. "But when you're done playing detective, remember this. Dad trusted me, not you." He turned and walked toward the door, but before stepping out, he waved the check one last time, like a trophy he had rightfully earned. I clenched my fists. I didn't care how long it took. I was going to prove the truth, and when I did, Ryan wouldn't be smirking anymore. Here's the next section, intensifying the conflict and unraveling the mystery behind the inheritance. The drive home was a blur. My fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Ryan's smug face played over and over in my mind, his words like poison seeping into my thoughts. "Dad trusted me, not you." I knew that was a lie. My father had always been a man of fairness, of principle. He never would have handed Ryan the lion's share of his wealth. Not after everything he had done. Not after the years of neglect, the manipulations, the betrayals. Something wasn't right. As soon as I stepped inside my apartment, I grabbed my laptop and started digging. If there had been any last-minute changes to the will, I needed to know when and how they had happened. I logged into my father's email account, the one he had given me access to when I helped manage his affairs. Scrolling through the inbox, I searched for anything related to the estate, and then I saw it. An email from his lawyer, dated just 2 weeks before he died. Attached is the updated version of your will per your request, Mr. Carter. My heart pounded as I opened the attachment. I scanned through the document, my breath hitching as I found what I was looking for. The distribution had changed. Most of the assets, stocks, and property now belonged to Ryan. I was left with only a fraction of what had originally been intended for me. But something felt off. The wording, the signatures, the tone. I dug deeper, searching for an earlier draft of the will, and when I found it, my stomach dropped. 3 months before my father died, he had drafted a will that was completely different. 50% of the estate had been mine. The rest was divided among charitable donations and a small portion for Ryan. But in the newer version, my share had been slashed. The charity contributions were erased, and Ryan had gained everything. I exhaled sharply, my pulse racing. This wasn't just a change of heart. This was manipulation. Fraud. My hands trembled as I picked up my phone and dialed the lawyer's number. He answered after a few rings. "Mr. Carter," he said, his tone professional yet distant. "Is there something I can help you with?" I forced my voice to stay even. "I need to ask about the changes to my father's will." There was a pause, then, "Your father made those changes personally. Everything was legally documented." I gritted my teeth. "I have an earlier version of the will. It's completely different. And the new one, it doesn't sound like my father. It doesn't look like something he would write." The lawyer hesitated. "Mr. Carter, I assure you, your father was of sound mind when he made the changes. If you're suggesting any foul play, I am." My voice came out sharper than I intended. "And I want a formal investigation." A long silence followed. When the lawyer finally spoke, his voice was careful. "If you truly believe there was misconduct, you have the right to challenge the will in court, but you need to be prepared. Cases like these can get messy." I swallowed hard. Messy. That was an understatement. Ryan would fight this with everything he had. He'd try to humiliate me, to destroy me, to make me regret ever challenging him. But I didn't care. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about justice. I stared at the email again, a newfound determination settling in my chest. Ryan thought he had won. He had no idea what was coming. Here's the next section, building the tension and setting the stage for the inevitable showdown. The next morning, I sat in the lawyer's office, my jaw clenched as I slid the printed copies of both wills across the table. He picked them up, his brow furrowing as he compared the documents. I studied his face, searching for any hint of doubt or hesitation. After a few moments, he set the papers down and folded his hands together. "These changes are significant," he admitted, "but the signature is your father's. The document is notarized. This won't be easy to challenge." I expected that, but I wasn't backing down. "Look at the date," I pressed. "He made these changes just 2 weeks before he passed. His health was failing by then. He wasn't in any condition to make such drastic decisions." The lawyer sighed, adjusting his glasses. "Are you suggesting coercion?" I leaned forward. "I'm suggesting fraud. My father was a man of principle. He was fair. He wouldn't have cut out the charity donations. He wouldn't have left Ryan with everything. Not unless someone pushed him into it." A long pause, then, "Do you have proof?" "Not yet, but I would find it." I left the office with one goal in mind, tracking down anyone who had been around my father in his final weeks. If Ryan had forced or manipulated him into signing that new will, someone had to know. I started with my father's caregiver, Mrs. Dawson. She had been with him for years, tending to his needs when I couldn't be there. I called her, and she agreed to meet me at a small cafe near her home. When I arrived, she was already seated, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She looked up as I approached, her warm eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "Mrs. Dawson," I greeted as I sat across from her. She offered me a sad smile. "I was wondering when you'd come." A chill ran down my spine. "You knew?" She nodded slowly. "I didn't see the will itself, but I saw your father in his last days. He wasn't himself. He was troubled. She paused, taking a sip of her tea. Ryan visited him often, more than usual, and every time he left, your father seemed more anxious, restless. My chest tightened. Did he ever say anything? She hesitated. One night he told me something strange. He said, I made a mistake, but it's too late to fix it now. The weight of those words crushed me. My father had known something was wrong. He had regretted it, and yet he had felt powerless to stop it. I leaned in, lowering my voice. Mrs. Dawson, I need to know, did Ryan ever force my father to do something he didn't want to do? She hesitated again, glancing around as if afraid someone might overhear. I can't say for certain, but I know your father was weak in those final weeks, easily confused. And Ryan has always known how to get what he wants. I clenched my fists. I had spent my whole life watching Ryan manipulate people. He always knew exactly what to say, what buttons to push. And now it seemed he had done the same to our father. But this time, he had gone too far. I took a deep breath. Would you be willing to testify if this goes to court? Mrs. Dawson hesitated, then gave me a firm nod. If it means the truth comes out, yes. I exhaled, a mix of relief and determination filling my chest. Ryan had rigged the game. He thought he had won, but I wasn't finished yet. Here's the next section, intensifying the tension as the truth begins to unravel. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with everything Mrs. Dawson had told me. My father's regret, Ryan's manipulation, the forged will that had stolen everything from me. But the next morning, as I sat in my car outside the bank, I knew one thing. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about justice, about proving my father's real wishes. I stepped inside, feeling the cool air hit my skin as I approached the receptionist. I need to see the branch manager, I said, keeping my voice calm. Do you have an appointment? She asked politely. No, I admitted, but it's about my late father's accounts. It's urgent. A few minutes later, I was ushered into an office where an older man in a tailored suit sat behind a mahogany desk. His nameplate read, Mr. Caldwell. What can I do for you? He asked, studying me over his glasses. I took a deep breath. My father, Richard Dawson, had an account here. I believe there were significant withdrawals made in his final weeks. I need to know who authorized them. He frowned, tapping on his keyboard. We take privacy seriously, but as you're listed as next of kin, I can check what's legally available to you. Seconds ticked by as he pulled up the record. Then his eyebrows lifted slightly. Well, this is unusual. I leaned forward. What? There were 3 large withdrawals, each within days of each other, all signed by your father. He turned the screen toward me. I scanned the dates. 2 weeks before his death, the same time Ryan had been visiting him frequently. I clenched my jaw. Can I see the signatures? He hesitated, then clicked another button. The scanned images of the withdrawal slips appeared. My stomach twisted. The first 2 signatures were messy but recognizably my father's. But the third, I felt my pulse quicken. The third was too clean, too precise. It wasn't his. I forced my voice to stay steady. Can you confirm these were signed in person? Mr. Caldwell studied the records again, then sighed. The last one was done by proxy. Proxy. Someone had signed for him, and I had a damn good idea who. I pushed back my chair. I need a copy of these records. Now. Mr. Caldwell hesitated but then printed them, sliding them across the desk. I'd advise you to tread carefully, he warned. If fraud is involved, this could turn into a serious legal battle. I nodded, gripping the papers. That's exactly what I want. By the time I reached Ryan's office, my blood was boiling. His secretary barely had time to announce me before I pushed open his door. He was leaning back in his leather chair, his feet propped up on the desk, sipping whiskey like he had nothing to lose. He smirked when he saw me. Well, I was wondering how long it would take you. I threw the documents onto his desk. Explain this. He glanced at them lazily, then sighed. You're still on this? It's over, little brother. Move on. My fist tightened. That last signature, it wasn't Dad's. His expression didn't change, but I saw the flicker of something in his eyes. You forged it. I stepped closer. You forced a dying man to change his will, and when that wasn't enough, you stole from him before he was even gone. Ryan took another sip of his drink, unfazed. You have no proof. I let out a bitter laugh. Oh, but I do. The bank records, the proxy signature, and Mrs. Dawson, she's ready to testify. For the first time, his smirk faltered. I leaned in, lowering my voice. I'm taking this to court, and when I'm done, you won't just lose the money, you'll lose everything. Ryan's jaw tightened. His fingers gripped the glass a little too hard. You think you can win? He sneered. I met his glare, unflinching. I don't think. I know. And for the first time, Ryan looked afraid. Here's the next section, where the battle escalates and Ryan starts to feel the walls closing in. The moment I stepped out of Ryan's office, I knew I had rattled him. His arrogance had cracked, just for a second. But it was enough. I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. I had one more stop to make. By the time I reached the law firm that handled my father's estate, my hands were still shaking. Not from fear, but from anger. This ends today. The receptionist led me to a conference room where my father's attorney, Mr. Langley, was waiting. He was an older man, the kind who had seen too much and trusted too little. He gestured toward a chair. Take a seat. I dropped the bank documents onto the table. I need to contest my father's will. His brows lifted slightly, but he didn't look surprised. And on what grounds? I exhaled sharply. Forgery, coercion, and theft. Mr. Langley studied me for a moment, then steepled his fingers. These are serious accusations. You'll need substantial proof. I tapped the papers in front of him. That's just the beginning. The bank confirmed a proxy signature. My father's nurse, Mrs. Dawson, she's willing to testify that Ryan manipulated him in his final days. And I know there's more. I just need time. Mr. Langley picked up the documents, scanning them. His face remained unreadable, but I saw the shift in his eyes. He knew. He had probably suspected it all along. Finally, he sighed. If what you're saying is true, we can file an injunction to freeze the inheritance until we take this to court. A weight lifted off my chest. How soon can we do that? He leaned back in his chair. Immediately. Ryan didn't see it coming. By the time he got the legal notice, his accounts were frozen, his assets were locked, and he was left scrambling. I sat in my car outside his house, waiting, watching. It didn't take long. The front door swung open and Ryan stormed out, his face red with fury. He was on the phone, pacing back and forth in his expensive suit, the one he had probably bought with our father's stolen money. I stepped out of my car and leaned against the hood, arms crossed. He saw me instantly. His eyes blazed. You did this, he growled, shoving his phone into his pocket. I tilted my head. Yeah, I did, his hands clenched into fists. You have no idea what you've started. Oh, I think I do, I shot back. You thought you could get away with it, that I'd just roll over and take it. But guess what? The law's on my side. The truth is on my side. He let out a bitter laugh. The truth? The truth is whatever people believe, and I have money, lawyers, connections. I stepped closer, lowering my voice, and I have proof. For the first time, he hesitated. I smiled coldly. See you in court, brother. Then I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, furious, defeated, and afraid. But this wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. Here's the final section, where everything comes crashing down for Ryan, and justice is finally served. The courtroom was silent. The only sound was the shuffle of papers and the occasional cough as the judge reviewed the evidence before him. The tension in the air was thick. Every muscle in my body was coiled tight, but I forced myself to stay still. This was it, the moment of truth. Ryan sat across from me, his jaw locked, his hands gripping the table. He looked like a man trying to hold on to the last remnants of his power, but I could see it in his eyes. He knew he was losing. The evidence had been overwhelming. The forged signature on the will, confirmed by handwriting experts, bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals, all leading to Ryan's personal accounts. Testimony from our father's nurse, detailing how Ryan manipulated a sick man into changing his will. Every lie he had built his life on was collapsing. His lawyer made a desperate attempt to twist the facts, to paint me as the bitter sibling out for revenge. But the judge wasn't buying it. And then came the final blow. Mr. Langley stood and placed a USB drive on the evidence table. "Your Honor, this is a recording from the security camera in Mr. Dawson's private study, dated just days before his passing." Ryan's face drained of color. The footage played. There on the screen was Ryan, standing over our father's frail body, forcing a pen into his trembling hand. "Just sign it," Ryan's voice hissed through the speakers. "I deserve it, not him." The courtroom gasped. It was over. Ryan's lawyer collapsed into his chair. The judge's gavel slammed down. "I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff. The will is void. The rightful inheritance is restored." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I had won, but Ryan had lost more than just money. As the verdict settled, the bailiffs moved in. Ryan was under arrest. The fraud, the coercion, the financial manipulation, it was all criminal. He turned to me as they cuffed him. His eyes burned with hatred. "You think this makes you better than me?" I met his glare with calm certainty. "No, Ryan, this makes me free." As he was led away, I felt the weight of years lift off my shoulders. The battle was finally over. Outside the courthouse, I stepped into the fresh air, closing my eyes for just a moment. The world felt different, lighter. This wasn't just about money, it was about justice. And today, for the first time in a long time, justice had won.